So a lot of people have been asking me on the comments what I thought about FIMO Professional, which seems to be what has been released as the replacement for FIMO Classic, which I much prefer to FIMO Soft. Well, I went out to the store and picked up a block, and I have gone ahead and I sculpted a miniature to give it a full test, really see what it's about and what I feel about it. So I'm going to get into that in a minute, show you and talk more about how it felt to sculpt, but right off the bat here I wanted to show you, here's the block of it. It costs the same as normal, here in the States it's $287, and same size block. It basically cooks at the same temperature and everything. But I did want to show you this versus my current mix real quick. So as you notice, I started out by picking a fun green. Well, just as the same as with FIMO Classic, there is no good neutral gray color, which is what I prefer to work with. I like the neutral color of it and the way the miniature looks in the end. This is the color you see for me with traditional FIMO Classic in the mix I do. And here's some of the green that I've recently bought. This color is called Leaf Green, and as I've mentioned before in various places, but I'm going to reiterate it here just to make it easier for people to see. This gray color is achieved by mixing black and white FIMO Classic, and some FIMO Mix Quick, which is a conditioner that they make for FIMO that helps smooth it out, make it more, moist so that it doesn't crack and it smooths easier. So this is made with 80% FIMO White, then 20% FIMO Black, and that would be the classic variety. And then once I get that all mixed up together and have that whole proportion, I take another 10% of that total and add in FIMO Mix Quick. And that's what makes this nice color, and it makes it more supple and easier to use. So just a quick thing I wanted to say when I started sculpting this miniature is I didn't do anything to this. I just opened the package, kneaded it in my hand to get it ready, and started sculpting. And it was very nice. So, but more about that as we move on into the review. As most of you know who watch this channel, I prefer sculpting with polymer clay, specifically FIMO Classic. But ever since Staedler released FIMO Professional in the US, I've been getting questions from people about what they should be using. Is it the same as FIMO Classic? Is it something different? What do they need to go and find, and what should they use? Well, I started getting these comments only about 6 months ago maybe, and I haven't had a chance to try it until today, as you can see in the video. But according to my research, it's actually been out for probably 2 years or so, at least from some initial reviews when they were sending it out. Now you may be wondering why I chose a green clay instead of the typical gray that I use. Well, as I mentioned, I do a mix of the clay, and but I decided I was just going to get a standard color because, once again, at least what I saw at the store, there is no nice neutral gray color. So I got something that would kind of fall in that value range, but it still has a color, because FIMO is not originally designed to be used how we're using it to sculpt miniatures. Obviously, it's totally fine, works great, but it's really used for making, at least initially, these one-of-a-kind, I guess I'd say dolls or figurines, where you actually use the color of the FIMO as the part. So, you can make a My Little Pony and with a blue body and the different colored hair, or make extruded pieces of polyclay, and cut it down into shapes, and by mixing and blending that together, all sorts of other ways to make really cool, neat things without having to worry about painting it afterwards. As you can probably see though, green was maybe not the best color. It was fun to sculpt in that color because it kind of gave me the sense and feeling that I was sculpting with green stuff again, even though obviously I'm not. But I will tell you what, it looks a lot like green stuff, and when I was putting on the initial skin on the armature, it was very difficult for me to tell if I had fully covered it. So, if you want to trick people into thinking you're sculpting with green stuff, this is a good way to go. But otherwise, you might want to pick a different color or go ahead and mix a gray, similar to what I just showed you earlier in the video. A lot seems to be the same between FIMO Classic and FIMO Professional. Same size, same price point, and overall it feels pretty much the same as well. But there are a couple things that I noticed when I started sculpting with it. So I always, add in Mix Quick to my FIMO. The conditioner really helps smooth the putty out, makes it just a touch softer, which I do prefer. Not much. It's not that noticeable, but it really smooths it out, moistens it so that when you pinch it down into really thin layers, it can hold the edge and it won't crack. I'd used FIMO by itself before, and it made a huge difference when I started mixing in Mix Quick. I don't know if it was because the clay I had was older and it really just needed to be conditioned, but even with the more recent blends that I have gotten, which have to be more recently produced, that is, they always seem to benefit from adding in Mix Quick. But the first thing I noticed about FIMO Professional is it was ready to go right out of the package. Again, this could be just because it's a newer batch, but it was super smooth, very easy to knead to warm up and get ready to use, and it had almost a shine to the surface, which brings me to my next point. And the next thing I noticed as I was sculpting with it is it seemed a little gummy in a way. Not quite the same as green stuff, but there was a little more bounce to it as I was working with it. This is probably because it's more supple than FIMO Classic was. The biggest thing I noticed though, because of this, was it had the glossy surface, which actually made it a little more difficult for me to blend. Typically, when I'm sculpting with FIMO, I can take a clay shaper when I really want to blend, because the silicone tip of the clay shaper actually grabs the FIMO more than a metal tool does. If you really want to have something glide over polyclay, I suggest using a metal tool. You do have to be delicate because it presses harder into the clay, but it will glide over the surface. If you want to pull it more, you need to use a clay shaper. And this was still the case, but it was far less likely to. I just guess I had to work at it more than I felt I normally had to when I would work on FIMO Classic. Now I want to say one last thing that might be affecting the consistency of the FIMO, just kind of as a disclaimer. Typically with polymer clays, you will see slight differences in the feel and consistency from color to color. I assume it has something to do with the dyes that just makes the clay react. So it could be that the green is just a little bit more supple because the green dye affects the clay differently. But and I might buy another pack to another color to try out, probably a black and white, so I can do my typical gray mix and see how that works. But I'm willing to bet that it's going to be pretty similar. So I guess in conclusion, I would consider this a good replacement for FIMO Classic. It is the replacement for FIMO Classic, so you kind of have no choice. If you want to work with FIMO, this is what you have to work with now. And just be prepared that it's going to be a little more ready to sculpt with, which means it's going to be softer and a little more supple and smooth. So you'll just have to get used to that. As always, I want to thank my patrons so much for supporting this video and all the other ones that I make. And I appreciate everyone on YouTube who continues to watch these and leaves comments and asks questions. Keep them coming. I enjoy interacting with everyone. And I am probably going to announce a Q&A show soon. I'll put up a separate video there where everyone can post their questions, and I will try and go through and answer them, because there's a lot of great questions coming in on the comments below here on YouTube and on Patreon. And not everybody sees those, but I get a lot of the same ones, and so I think it'll be very good for everybody, very helpful for you to be able to see them in one place at one time. If you would like to become a patron, just follow the link up in the corner and see what it's all about on there, and I'd appreciate any support, even if it's just sharing the videos. Now that you know FIMO Professional is a good substitute to continue sculpting with polyclay, I hope everybody will go out and pick some up if they haven't already, and give it a try, and keep sculpting.